So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you all again for joining us in the Stint Lounge. So this room is intended really for an open discussion and Q&A with Jonathan, Burman, and the Stint team. So please feel free to interact and ask questions and jump in and out of the room as you please. Really what we want you guys to do is just think of this as almost like a virtual booth of sorts. Jonathan Burman is a human capital investor at the best workplace and is going to dive into the neuroscience of insight. So with that said, Jonathan, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and let you just kind of run the floor here.
Great. Thank you so much, Emiliano. I really appreciate it. And it's a great pleasure to talk to you about a topic that I just find absolutely fascinating and intriguing. So Emiliano had alluded to me being a human capital investor, but by trade, I'm an organizational psychologist. And in grad school, I remember very early on, one of the first things that we discussed is, how do you get inside people's heads? You know, maybe you've heard this before from a marketing perspective. How do you get inside people's heads? And there's a lot of pathways to it. Of course, you could go under knife and scalpel and do it that way. You could use EEGs and fMRIs. You could ask people questions. The way that we do it, of course, in the world of clinical psychology at least, is we ask people questions. And we try and get to insight. You know, so, you know, what is insight? And here I want to differentiate a little bit about, I know there's the marketing definition of insight, and I want to compare and contrast that to the psychological definition of insight. So typically when we're looking to create insight, we're looking to inspire a cause and effect in an individual. So let's just say somebody is a bad boss, that they're toxic, they're a bully. Maybe they're narcissistic. So we want to promote that insight of cause and effect. This behavior affects this individual. So that's what we're trying to do. That's, you know, I spend the bulk of my time trying to create insight in a leadership team on, if we behave this particular way, it's going to cause this particular thing. What gets in the way is a lot of bias. There's a lot of junk, and it's history. It's a lot of our own personal history that gets in the way of that insight. And so when I was talking to my wonderful wife about this particular topic, she said, well, you know, insight from a marketing perspective is a little bit different. And I just had this one definition here from Morgan Shorey. Insight is a truth which until now has not been leveraged, but if leveraged, will generate revenue. So I thought, okay, there's a lot of parallels here. There's a lot of parallels here. I mean, this is not wholly different from me trying to stimulate, let's just say in Megan, an insight that a particular behavior actually long-term is not good. So I think one of the key differences, and here I'd love for us to talk about this, is that you all are trying to create personas. So your insight data that you're getting from whatever analytics tool, engine, SEO, focus groups, you're trying to create a customer persona. And please, any of you marketing experts jump in here and tell me how wrong I am, but this is my understanding. You create these personas so that way you can, with your clients, put together campaigns that are going to appeal directly to that persona, and then you'll get that revenue that Morgan Shorey had talked about. So in many ways, I think, again, there's parallels to what we do. Now, our personas, in the world of psychology, our personas are captured in a book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So if you have a particular dysfunction, we'll look you up in the DSM, and that's a treatment plan. I think that's the main difference. Now, what I wanted to do, and I hope everyone will beg my indulgence, I have 2 PowerPoint slides I would like to share with you. So this is not going to be PowerPoint heavy. I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint myself, but I wanted to make sure that we had a level playing field about some of the terminology that I'll be referring to that gets in the way of these insights, whether or not from a marketing or psychological perspective. And then I would love to just open it up and talk to you about, again, the neuroscience of insight. So here, let me share my screen. Oh, Emiliano, are you the host? Or Megan?
Yep, I am the host, so I will make you co-host. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Please, Emiliano, give me the power.
You got it.
All right.
You are good to go.
All right, right on, right on. So can you all see my screen? It should look like a PowerPoint screen.
Yep.
Okay, cool, cool. So let me just go into slideshow mode. So first thing I want to talk about is the motivational triad. The motivational triad is something that anybody who's taken cognitive behavioral classes will understand this. All animals primarily have three motivations: the things that motivate them to get up in the morning, the things that motivate them to seek out food, to seek out a mate. So those three buckets are avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, and saving energy. Now, avoiding pain seems quite obvious. None of us like to feel pain. So there are these biochemical mechanisms that react to tell us basically to avoid something. And this is connected to fight, flight, or freeze. Maybe you've heard this before, fight or flight. You know, sometimes triggered by this little pea-sized mechanism in the brain called the amygdala. So basically, if you're feeling threatened for whatever reason, there's two chemicals that are introduced into your body. One of them is adrenaline. It's getting you ready for a fight. You know, that's also, ironically enough, is the chemical that's produced when you're getting hyped up for something, when you're getting excited about something. The other one is cortisol. You probably all heard of this before. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So this is what, when you're feeling fight or flight, the body floods into your system to get you ready to avoid pain. Then when it comes to seeking pleasure, there's some chemicals, like one of them is oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone or the trust hormone. That, again, is the biochemical reaction to, this is why we want to stick with our tribe. So when you're with your tribe or your familiars, your family, oxytocin is released. People that you trust, trusted colleagues. Also serotonin. Serotonin is referred to as the mood hormone. If you don't get enough sleep, you're in a bad mood. And sleep is directly connected to your level of serotonin. Dopamine. I think we all know as marketing professionals what dopamine is. That's that reward hormone. So dopamine gets flooded into your system when somebody says, hey, Megan, great job. Hey, a little bit of dopamine. Dopamine is also when some people compliment our car. Hey, I like your car. Hey, dopamine. When somebody gives us a thumb up on Facebook or Twitter, that's also introduces dopamine into our system. Now, this next part, saving energy, this is what gets us into trouble in the modern age. And this is the big confound for insight, I think, from a psychological perspective, but I would also dare say a marketing perspective. And it's this mechanism called the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system. I'm just going to refer to it as RAS. So RAS is responsible for all of our bias, all of our prejudice, habits, intuition. So it's those automatic thoughts that you have. Any automatic thought that you have, you know, like if Tina here on the call is like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. That's your RAS talking. That's your RAS talking. And the RAS is an interesting mechanism. So I want to talk about this very quickly, and then again, just open it up for the discussion. The RAS sometimes referred to our subconscious, unconscious. It is our filter. It's what we pay attention to. And it also is creating all of our bias. So I want to talk about this in terms of dogs. I personally love dogs, and I've encountered people in my life who hate them, who can't stand dogs. And it was always very curious to me, like, how could you not like dogs? It's very odd to me. So this is basically the reticular activating system, the RAS, in operation. And let me kind of walk through this. So the RAS could be programmed by a series of events. So one of them is an anchoring bias would be caused from a direct experience. Let's just say you were bit by a dog when you were little, 3, 4, 5 years old, before memories are being formed. So that would cause an anchoring bias that you're not even aware of. And then you could have your father telling you, hey, you got to be careful about dogs. So that's an authority bias that we might have. Then confirmation bias. I'm sure we've all heard about this in the news recently, confirmation bias. So something in the news says, oh, dogs are dangerous. Ah, I knew it. My dad told me that I was bit by one, dogs are dangerous. So now you have a belief, and this is where it gets interesting. That belief bias that you have starts to fractionate. In other words, you start looking at people who like dogs as weird and illogical. Like, how could you like dogs? They're mean, they're nasty, they bite people. I don't trust you because you like dogs. This creates an in-group bias. So now you just want to be associated with people that don't trust dogs, that don't like dogs. And anybody that likes dogs, those people are crazy. So let's get together, you know, Emiliano, me, you, Megan, let's get together and talk about these people that like dogs and say how crazy they are. So as a result, at this point in our brains, we associate dogs as just threatening, nasty, mean, and anybody who thinks differently, they're crazy. Does any of this sound familiar? Think about your own biases. Think about your own prejudice. This is often as a result of all these different experiences that you have and the people that you associate with. So I want to now just kind of open it up and you know, Megan, I know that you had some questions. You and I had a great conversation about this a couple of weeks ago, but really would just kind of love to open it up and just talk to you all about how does this affect your ability to get insight from people that you survey, insight from the data analytics that you use. Does this affect, do you have a bias towards certain data sets? Do you have a bias towards certain sectors? Let's just talk about this. Questions, comments, sarcastic remarks? I take them all.
I have two thoughts actually as you were going through the slides. First of all, I think, you know, here at Cint, we don't write any surveys, but we do see a lot of them and we see a lot of the ways that questions are phrased. So it's kind of interesting to see how maybe the way things are worded could create a bias amongst the respondents unintentionally, and that could be affecting a lot of the insights that we're gathering. That was just one of the top things that came to mind for me as you were going through this. And then shifting gears a little bit to the RAS, I personally can relate that to a lot of what's going on right now in the world, the confirmation bias especially. It's making people, you know, I guess, you know, as you're going through that first part and then the authority, confirmation, and then belief, that belief bubble right there is, I think, where a lot of people are right now on either side of whatever you're thinking of, whether it's, you know, political, coronavirus, whatever we're going through at this moment. And it's making people feel very strongly one way or the other. We're not able to really connect the pieces. We're either yes or no. I'm feeling like that is going on a lot in the United States and in our culture. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of that is kind of backed by what you've just kind of presented to us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to touch on what you had said earlier about wording. So a lot of studies have been done on this, about how wording will actually point your brain in a particular direction. I myself, I used to conduct focus groups. And I remember there was a gentleman that I worked with. The first question that he would ask after demoing a product, he would say, okay, let's start with what you don't like about the product. And I had always been told that you don't start with a negative, that you start with a positive or neutral, because you are going to skew just based on the very first question. So if your first question is something about what don't you like, then people are much more likely to answer negatively to the consequent questions as well. Mm-hmm. Is that also shared in the marketing world? Is that understanding and conception shared in the marketing world?
I think it depends on who you speak with. I think people have different opinions on that depending on the type of work that they're doing. But we certainly have a lot of clients that do ask us those questions on, if we start with something negative, is it going to influence somebody's decision? Or if they're comparing 5 or 6 different brands, if we show them one brand that they don't like out of that, 5 or 6 of them, then are they going to automatically associate all of those in a negative way in some manner? So, and will that affect their responses to us?
Yeah. Just to kind of expand on Megan's point, I think further it's depending, and this is from a sales perspective, right? But obviously objectives come into play. And when I see a lot of competitive analysis, it's almost like you are looking for those biases in a certain aspect, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's not, I always kind of felt that was a very skewed way of looking at things. But, if you are in a position where you have done something and you're trying to validate your kind of stance, I guess, or your take for a specific product development, why would you want to show anything different? So, mm-hmm. Yeah. And it looks like we have a comment here from somebody that says, Laura, thank you for sharing this, Laura. She said, especially in cut sat work.
Customer satisfaction, I guess?
Yeah, customer satisfaction. I find that there is a bug that, I find that if there is a bug they are bothered by, they can not often get to the neutral positives, get the negatives off of their chest, and then they can move on. So that's a valid point. You do see that quite often as well. And Laura, please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to just jump in.
Yet, so I can relate this to coaching, that it's very difficult sometimes for me to get insight from somebody unless they get the stuff out. It's almost like getting venom out of your system. So I kind of have to let them exhaust themselves as far as, I can't believe this, blah, 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 and this, blah, blah, blah. And I think we all know that that's the belief bias talking. So as a rule, you got to let that kind of get itself out. Make sure that you understand that it's heard before you can get to that level of insight. In other words, if I'm coaching somebody, let's just say I'm coaching Laura, and Laura is just like, dang it, my customers, they're idiots. And I know Laura would never say this, but they're idiots. And so I have to let her get that venom out before I can get to the point of, well, why do you think that is? Or where do you think that's coming from? Like, I hear you, Laura, that, not only are you frustrated, but it sounds like there were some mistakes made in the past by your customers. So where do you think that's coming from? And in the world of psychology, that's where we want to go. So I can work with people one-on-one. Like, I could work with Laura to say, like, well, where do you think that came from? And hopefully we get to that point, that insight that, oh gosh, when I was 10 years old, I had somebody say this, and now I look at people this particular way. that makes sense. And I have to assume, just again, based on conversations with my wife about marketing, it seems to a very large extent you're also trying to get to that aha of, this is what's really going to motivate me to buy a particular product or create that emotional bond with a brand.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've asked people a million times, and I know this is an old example, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So why do people love iPhones? I don't get it myself. Well, I do now, but at first I was just like, I don't get, my Samsung works just as fine. It does all this stuff. No, Jonathan, no, iPhones are better. Okay, why? Well, okay, first of all, we all know that they were the first out of the gate, right? Their branding and their marketing is fantastic. They build that very emotional connection that it doesn't matter whether or not the Samsung does the same thing. It doesn't matter whether or not the Samsung is cheaper. And I'm sorry, I'm not getting any money from Samsung, just so you know. But I now understand, because someone had said, well, it was the first cell phone that I fell in love with. It's like, I totally get it. I totally get it now. I mean, does that make sense from a marketing perspective, that, it could be that brand that you fell in love with, that's kind of the insight, and maybe how do you create that relationship again? How do you create that brand love?
So I can personally relate to that on the iPhone level, but also, this is going to sound kind of dumb, but there is a very specific Sloppy Joe deli here in Millburn. It's called Millburn Deli. They just opened up a shop here in Morristown. And I will not have a Sloppy Joe. I've never had a Sloppy Joe outside of that one deli. And I think it's because I'm afraid that I'm going to find something that's equivalent or maybe better. And all of my thoughts around Millburn Deli being the best Sloppy Joes in New Jersey are just going to be crushed. And I'm going to be devastated by it, because that's all I've had since I was 8 or 10 years old. So maybe other people feel the same way about different things, different brands, household items, things like that.
Yeah, I think one particular example, sorry, Jonathan, one particular example that I always found very intriguing was from a standalone store, Target, and how my wife and pretty much all of the women in my family gravitate towards Target as opposed to Walmart. And looking into that from a market research perspective, specifically around branding, it all starts with that feeling that Jonathan made mention to, right? The Target in particular is a very synonymous brand, right? It's a target, it targets you, but then the color scheme that goes along with it, red promotes passion and love, and white promotes cleanliness, right? So subconsciously, like you said, there's something innate in us that kind of gravitates us towards that, as opposed to Walmart's color scheme and branding, where yellow promotes energy, blue promotes a bit of, well, the color blue that they chose to utilize promotes a bit of a cheaper experience, right, or a lesser experience. And then the white is supposed to promote cleanliness, but when you go in and have that in-store experience, it doesn't match what it's promoting. Target does, right? It's always more organized, etc. So I think that there are, that's my example. I think there's definitely some subconscious features that I even find myself gravitating towards Target now as opposed to Walmart.
I would, hi, this is Tina. I would submit also that Target, to the point made earlier, does a much better job hitting sort of the seeking pleasure centers, right? So throughout their shopper journey, be it online or in store, especially in store, they have built-in areas of reward. They have built-in ways to set a mood, right? Like the shopping experience reinforces the pleasure aspects versus a Walmart where the shopping experience is flat, right? So yes, it is, yes, about the brand and the color theory behind it, but it's also the way they reinforce and back that up, the science behind why we buy, and they're reinforcing those pleasure centers.
So Tina, could you elaborate on the reward piece? Like, because that is that sensory, I never even thought about that, right? When I think of Walmart, I think of like the FMCG, like the fast moving consumer goods that they put in front of you as you're
Oh,
going,
sure.
and it's endless. And to
For
me,
sure. I mean, you look at the store design, right, of a
yeah,
Target. They have dedicated, beautifully, for mass in particular. They're taking cues from the Sephoras and the Ultas and those type of environments where their shelving is significantly different and it's bins and it looks more curated, right? The lighting in these areas is more contemporary. It sets off a different tone, right? There are built-in areas to reward yourself, and it is that discovery. There's a reason why people call it going on a Target run. You never really know what you're going to get, right? And that's all those built-in areas, right? Right when you walk in, it's the dollar zone. Oh, great, there's new stuff there. It's all these points of discovery that really, they're just reinforcing that pleasure center all the time. And that's why people, like, even in a pandemic, still want their Target, right? And it's not
exactly.
because, price comparable to Walmart. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not. But like, are you gonna want to choose a Target experience over a Walmart experience? I would submit, yeah, right.
Yep. Yeah.
Just you don't feel like you've lost your soul a little bit, right? I mean, I shop at both retailers for different reasons, but do I enjoy one over the other? Absolutely, because it's been designed that way.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. Also, a lot of the Targets have Starbucks in them, so it's really easy to say, hey, I'm going to get my cup of coffee, I'm going to walk around, or I'm going to get Starbucks as I leave. It's kind of like a reward, like you mentioned. And some of them also have the CVS's in them as well, so you can get your prescriptions all in one spot rather than having to make 3 separate stops. Now you're just going into one store and probably picking up things that you didn't even know you needed around the household, but it's convenient. So
There was, I don't know if you all were familiar with this study, but they had, they tested oxytocin levels of people that would go to like regular stores, like before they went to the store and then after they went to the store. And so places that we frequent elevates our level of oxytocin, which is the trust hormone, the love hormone. And it's the same thing that's true if you have a great relationship with a colleague, your oxytocin level will be elevated. Going to the same corner store, going to the same Target, it's that comfort. My dad used to call it the warm, fuzzy feeling. It's that warm, fuzzy feeling you get of familiarity. I know myself, I live now down in Atlanta, but as much as people hate it, the Philadelphia International Airport to me is a warm and fuzzy. I go in there, it's just like, I'm home, even though my home is now in Atlanta, because I spent so much dang time in that airport. I know every single gate. I feel comfortable in there, even though it's just like, it's still kind of dirty and they're still trying to refurbish it. It's just like, wait, I like that dirt. I participated in that dirt. So I don't know if you all feel the same way, but Tina, I really appreciate that comment, because that's, I think it was Tina,
Yeah.
about seeking pleasure. Yeah, I mean, that comfort of the familiar, which again also creates a confirmation bias.
Yes, it does. I would also say I would love to see some data around the how much adrenaline and or cortisol were in people's worlds after shopping at Walmart versus you know what I mean? Like one is like avoiding pain, so I'm I don't need the stress of that environment. Sorry, just a little sidebar.
So I have a question for all of you here. Like, and Jonathan, maybe a little bit more poignant to you, but is retail therapy a thing in your world? Like, is that a real thing?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. There's a lot of great novelty therapies out there. That's one of them. So in the world of cognitive behavioral psychology, a key aspect of behavior change or trying to help people is systematic desensitization. Systematic desensitization. And it works very much like a muscle. So let's just say you have a fear of spiders, okay? One of the ways that we help people overcome their fear of spiders is, okay, you're deathly afraid of spiders. I'm not going to show you any pictures of spiders, but just think about like a spider just for 1 second, and then we'll focus on our breathing. Okay. Then we'll get you to the point where maybe you can draw a picture of a spider and the whole time relaxing and breathing. And then you actually get to the point where they're able to hold a tarantula on their hand and they don't go into a panic. So the reason I mention that is, like, we know systematic desensitization works. And we know that if we can get somebody in a familiar, comfortable environment, that is ideal for getting deeper insights. And for some people, that is retail. For some people, they are very comfortable in a retail environment, like a mall. In Minneapolis, this is probably 20 years ago at this point, but they did this very novel thing where there was people that were suffering depression and anxiety, and they would go to the mall to relieve that depression and anxiety. So they would have therapy in the mall. And they would say, okay, so let's go into a store that you're not familiar with. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. Okay, well, let's just walk by it and just focus on our breathing. So to your point, Emiliano, yeah, retail therapy, there's, I think, multiple avenues for tweaking some of these things that we talked about as far as the reticular activating system, because you're trying to reprogram people. I hate to say it that way, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is true.
I think also those, shopping networks like HSN, QVC, for people that don't want to go into a store, but maybe they are suffering from anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, they probably have a good feeling after they've made that immediate purchase. And then once they know that the items have arrived on their doorstep, then they feel good again. And that's what makes repeat customers of these TV shows or, TV shopping networks for people like that, or people that don't want to leave. I know sometimes, I'm always like waiting for my Amazon packages to hit my doorstep, and I'm pumped to open them up because sometimes I don't even know what I've ordered because I've ordered so much recently. So I know I'm not the only one out there. So
Yeah, right on. I identify with that. Absolutely. So I'm a musician, and I buy guitar strings and, guitars from time to time. And boy, am I excited when I click on the purchase, and boy, am I ever excited when I receive it. All this stuff is elevating our dopamine. Now there's a dark side. I think we all recognize the dark side to this, which is dopamine addiction. So someone who's a shopaholic, and I'm just going to use the Apple example earlier, not disparaging anybody that loves Apple, but I know people that are addicted to Apple products. There's no other word for it. They compulsively buy every new phone, even when they don't need one. So this addiction, this affiliation, this in-group bias, there's a dark side to it. And I think that we've seen this in the political realm right now, to the point where, I am so affiliated with my in-group, anybody else who's not is an idiot, and it's now getting to the point where it's actually dangerous. There's people are threatening bodily harm because you don't think like me. It used to be, you don't look like me, therefore you're a threat. Now it's, you don't think like me and you're a threat. So there's a dark side to all of this. Thoughts, sarcastic remarks? I know I hate to bring it to the the dark political examples, but
Mhm.
it is true.
Well, thanks for being the fun police there, John.
Yeah, but
No, but you're absolutely right.
Kelly brought up one of my favorite examples, Trader Joe's. So,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Buck Chuck.
Kelly, I have to ask, so if you don't mind sharing, are you a Trader Joe's regular, and what is it that you like about Trader Joe's?
Well, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so I like Trader Joe's. I have a background in, big CPG firms, but I like the quirky little brands, and I like the fun treasure hunt experience that you have with Trader Joe's as well. They've got, different holiday things, fun things that other people don't, come up with. I think they're quicker to market with a lot of things because they're private. But I think they do a really nice job with the in-store experience.
So yes, and boy, I don't remember the name of the book, but there was a book written by a marketing person specifically about Trader Joe's. So Trader Joe's is arguably, if you look at revenue per square foot, Trader Joe's is the most successful grocery store chain in the history of grocery. If you just look at revenue per square foot. And, Kelly, I really appreciate everything that you shared, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it an experience and not just an inconvenience. And, full disclosure, my wife and I love Trader Joe's for all those reasons. They're certainly not cheap. It's not the cheapest around, that's for sure, but it's unique, it's different, and it speaks to people that affiliate with being unique and different. And they very deliberately entered the market with that in mind, which again gets back to the affiliations, the in-group experience, people that are curious about food, people that are curious about, boy, I don't know what satay chicken is. I'll give it a shot. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kelly.
I've also noticed that their help is like more friendly than traditional supermarkets, and I think maybe they're taking a little bit better care of. I don't know, but I just noticed when I go into Trader Joe's, they seem a little more upbeat, a little happier, versus some retailers are like, oh yeah, okay, gosh, or what's your card number? They do seem a little more engaged.
They purposely, but I'm looking up the name of this book because I do recommend it. It's really Build a Brand Like Trader Joe's. That's what it's called. Build a Brand Like Trader Joe's, and let me find the author's name. Mark Gardner. So he was a former crew member of Trader Joe's, and he received special permission to reveal some of the secret sauce of Trader Joe's. They select talent that is like over the top eager. And something like when they have orientation, or not orientation, before they hire people, they'll get people in a room and be like, okay, who here wants to learn something new? And the more eager the person is to raise their hand, they're just like, that's probably going to be a great employee. So they look for the people who are like almost over the top eager to learn things and over the top eager to connect with people. So that's part of their selection criteria. Anybody that's been to a Trader Joe's knows that sometimes, like, yeah, I can't get the person to shut up. They're all very nice, but sometimes they just want, oh yeah, let me show you this too, and let me show you this too.
So I have a question for you. And throughout all of this in your presentation, what are some of the things that we can do to train our brains to be more open to insights?
Yeah, really good question. And the This bumps up against this term agility. And maybe you've heard this in an organizational context, organizational agility. And one of the ways that organizations approach this to promote more insight very, very deliberatively is to embrace continuous improvement. So by continuous improvement, that is like just continuous learning and being open to novelty, just opening your mind to new things, reading things that you don't agree with, and just trying to process things that maybe you never knew anything about. So, you know, as an organizational psychologist, one of the things that we will do is we'll interface with the leadership and we'll say, okay, what are you doing to constantly improve the customer experience? We sent out net promoter score surveys. Okay, what are you doing with that feedback? Well, that's usually where it stops. They'll do the NPS, but they won't do anything with that feedback. So it's like, okay, so the next thing is maybe do internal focus groups on, hey, what do we do with this data? And you as leadership, you need to sponsor whatever innovation, service innovation, or new product innovation comes out of that. But on a personal level, Emiliano, I know for myself, what I do is I'll just start going down a rabbit hole on something I knew nothing about previously. So the reason for this, there's actual chemical in your brain called neuroepinephrine. And neuroepinephrine, they've found, is actually the learning chemical. And the more that you learn, the more that you open up your mind to something, the more insight that you're going to have about yourself, the more connections. You just end up making connections. Cause, effect. Remember, insight from the psychological perspective is cause and effect. You end up making a lot more connections. And ironically enough, or not surprisingly, children's brains are riddled with neuroepinephrine. So that's why children are so insightful. They're making these connections all the time. And as adults, we start having biases, rules. Oh, Megan, you can't think that way. That's wrong to think that way. You know, we start, censoring ourselves. So continuous learning, specifically about things that you don't know anything about, creates this neuroepinephrine, will cause you to generate insights about yourself. Something that I do with clients often is I'll ask the client, hey, could bring in an article about something that you're interested in but never had a chance to really learn. And then we'll start discussing it, and I'll see like light bulbs start going off. At first, some of them are resistant, like, why the hell would I do this, Jonathan? Just trust me. You're paying me money for this. Just trust me on this. And they end up like learning and being very grateful because it's literally like your eyes open up. Yet, this is why I love doing focus groups with kids. Yes. Kids are the best. Kids are the best. They have insights that go way beyond what most adults have. And, who has children here? Just, okay. Yeah, Emiliano, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, kids just make connections on things that are just like, oh my God.
Oh, absolutely. My 5-year-old daughter is a prime example. She's right now in a very questionable phase, right? She just questions everything to get to the root of why things are the way they are, right? Like, why are we doing a baby shower this weekend? That was the question. I was like, well, I guess I got to think about that, right? Like, but she's just making these connections. So yeah, and my 8-year-old son as well, but it's kind of different. But yeah, to your point, children are amazing. They are very, very insightful and have very few biases other than what they don't like to eat.
Yeah. Which I don't know if you heard, but they did some novel studies on food bias and where food bias comes from. A lot of this comes out of Stanford. I wish I could remember the name of the study, but at this point it's about at least 10 to 12 years old. But at Stanford, they did a very interesting thing. what they did is they had, this was at a daycare center where they had children from ages of, I think the youngest was 4, from like 4 to 8 years old, I think was the range. And they set it up so there was like one buffet of fruits and vegetables and good stuff. And there was another buffet of cookies, cake, candy. So what do you think the kids did at first? So for the first day and a half, they gorged themselves on all the crap. Then over time, they started by themselves eating the good foods. So they willingly started eating the fruits and vegetables. So what's that telling us?
Don't buy the junk food.
A, don't make it available.
Right.
If you just don't buy it, they won't eat it. That's true. And what else? What else do you think may have been, aside from the obvious, like, yeah, just don't have it around?
Sure. Oh, I don't know. That's I don't know. What is it?
So basically the kids from a very early age were programmed to favor candy, cookies and cake. They were programmed. So the minute that you remove the programming, our bodies want the good food. So our bodies want the fruits and vegetables. So it's oftentimes, and we do this unconsciously. So I had stepkids. So with my stepkids, I know unconsciously, I was letting them know that cookies, cake, candy was a reward.
Yeah.
Right? And we do this innocently. So the minute that you kind of pull that out of it and be like, okay, look, well, here's food. Here's food. Help yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to eat. Kids will willingly eat the good foods. It's just that we program them into believing that they should be eating the sweet stuff because they want to be constantly rewarded. In other words, it's a dopamine response that we're creating in them unconsciously.
Wow, that's interesting, because now it makes me look at birthday parties and things of that nature, right? We always are just jamming cookies and cake, to Tina's point, right? We're promoting those rewards. Like, why does my grandma fill a piñata every birthday, and she's in the dental field, but then gets mad at us for having cavities? Like, Grandma, you did that. That's on you, Grandma.
Spot on. Yeah,
Right.
that's exactly right. So when I was a kid, if we went to the doctors, this is the incredible irony in this one. We would go to the doctors or go to the dentist, and my mom would be like, as a reward, let's go to McDonald's.
Yeah, I'm guilty. Yes.
Yeah, right. It's just like, hey, you're healthy. Here's some stuff that's going to make you unhealthy. Yeah. Yeah, it makes no sense at all, but it's absolutely fascinating. But all this goes back to, I do believe, this programming aspect. And again, I'm just constantly fascinated by when I talk to, I talked to a friend fairly recently who is very politically aligned with one particular party. And I've known him 30 years, 35 years. We know each other very well, very well. We've been to each other's weddings. I mean, just we've known each other. We were in a band together. I mean, we were best of friends for many years. So just after 2 minutes of talking, he automatically went into, he started yelling at me because I asked him a question. And I asked him a question in a very flat tone. So, Chris, what do you think of what's going on in the news? He started yelling at me and just saying, like, I can't believe that they're doing this. And so, like, Chris, I'm not the enemy here. I've known you for 35 years. Like, hey, man. So this programming, it creeps in. We're very unaware of it. And a lot of it, again, has to do with once you just have that inkling of an idea, so I'm half Italian, so I'm going to bust on Italians here for a minute. All Italians are drunkards. Okay. So you might have that thought in your head, and then you see an Italian drinking at a bar. It's like, ah, see, there you go. I don't want to be associated with them. It creeps in. You're not even aware of these things. They really sneak their way into your subconscious, and all of this is done to save energy. They say at any one point, there's 2 million bits of information that we're surrounded by. So the brain is filtering out all those 2 million bits to just the key components. Because if we had to think constantly and register like, okay, right now I'm a little hot, and there's the color blue and yellow and black, and I have a callus on my finger, and so if we had to think about that all the time, we'd be paralyzed. So we rely on all these biases to help us get through the day. But again, we have to, that's why I love the question that you asked, like, how do we become more aware of our biases? It's really just this ongoing learning, which creates an environment in your brain to be more open to, oh, things might be different. Things might not be the same. I want to share with you a quick story, because it relates to, Emiliano, what you had said about kids. So I remember my stepdaughter at one point, she was in, I don't know, second grade, whatever. And they had a free drawing exercise where they could draw whatever they wanted on a piece of paper, crayon, just draw whatever you want. And so the teacher saw her, and by the way, this was at a Catholic school. So the teacher saw her, and she was drawing, it looked like a portrait. And she said, "Hey, Cassandra, what are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing God." And the teacher said, "Oh, honey, no one knows what God looks like." And she goes, "Well, just give me a minute, they'll know." And just that innocence of children, and just being able to throw away the conventions, like, no, you need to think this way. It's only one way. Hey, it's only this way. If we can just dispense with all of that stuff, I like political parties. If we could dispense with political parties that are buried in ideology, arguably we'd be more progressive in general. But I'll back off politics. That's my 2 cents. Any other questions, comments? Megan, did you have, because I know you and we talked about this for quite a bit. Did you have any other, I know at one point you're asking me a bunch of questions about it, so.
Yeah, no, I think, a lot of my questions from earlier, a lot of things that you had brought up, you had answered throughout the presentation. The one thing that we had discussed is, what can we do as market researchers to create more accurate personas, and trying to hopefully get rid of some of this bias that's there. I think it's something that we're trying to do every day, but I think we could all probably be a little bit better at it at times. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I would love to hear from the group here when it comes to creating personas. How aware of biases are you? Does that factor into the process? I would just love to hear what you do as professionals to ensure that whatever you're bringing to the client is thoroughly vetted and thought through.
Is great. So I'm just going to do a quick plug for the next session here in the chat. I'm going to attach the link for everyone. After we end, please feel free to join us there with Melissa Gonçalves. She's a co-founder at CORE, and she's going to speak on equality in an unequal world. So yeah, please feel free to jump over there after today's session. But we still have 5 minutes, so any other questions, please feel free to shoot over. I do have one question for you, John, and even you, Megan, in regards to networking with you guys outside of this, how do we do that? How does one get a hold of you, or how does somebody, connect with you if they have any further questions, whether it's business related or just simply networking?
Sure. Well, I'll put my email into the chat as well. And my company and my website is the Best Workplace. So it's thebestworkplace.com. And that's my email, Jonathan Burman at thebestworkplace.com. And the majority of my work and the things that I do is really focused on optimization. So it's making your organization run better. And then I also do a lot of individual coaching as well. So making you more productive, getting rid of your biases so you can think more clearly and objectively. And now I'll throw it over to Megan.
I also just popped in my contact information as well into the chat box. So definitely feel free to reach out, email me, and we can always hop on the phone too and just kind of discuss any questions, concerns that you guys may have.
Cool. Now, did I see there's John Hurst. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, related to, I work for an international NGO, and as we do market research in the US, trying to discern biases people have about, should we be involved overseas, and, just a sense of internationalism versus nationalism in this very challenging environment. It's been very hard to discern that from surveys and focus groups and some of those things. I wonder if you have any wisdom there.
So if I heard you right, it's a matter of factoring in whether or not people are like anti-globalist or globalist. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. No, not really, other than I've seen more and more surveys recently asking, what is your political affiliation? And I think there's pros and cons to that, because you could be biasing yourself by saying, oh, well, they are putting that they're Democrat or Republican, therefore they will automatically think all these things. But at the same time, I think that that's a benefit, because if somebody is saying, I'm just using this as an example, I'm a registered Republican, by the way, so I'll bash on my own party. So if you put Republican, there may be a chance, and there's surveys out there, Gallup surveys and Rasmussen surveys, to show that Republicans are, generally speaking, majority anti-globalist. So to be able to kind of factor that in, if you're creating a persona, I think that really helps. I think it helps. I guess as long as you're transparent about it, that's the main thing. And I think Gallup, we all respect and honor Gallup, because I think that they do a good job as far as transparency and their data science transparency. So that to me is something that I try and factor in as well. This is where I'm getting this information from, and these are the confounds in that information.
Yeah, and I think to Jonathan's point, I know we're kind of butting up against the time here, but I've seen surveys as well where the respondents are asked, are you Democrat, Republican, which way do you affiliate yourself, multiple times throughout the survey, sometimes even like 10 times throughout the length of a survey, which, at the end of the day, I feel like that almost reinforces in the respondent's mind, okay, I am a Republican or I am a Democrat, so I should be answering this way. So it's almost like forcing them to create their own biases. You could be a Democrat, but you could be like somewhere in the middle in terms of your thoughts. But if you keep saying, I'm a Democrat, or I'm Republican, you're going to start answering further and further left or right, depending on, the topic. So. Yeah,
it's a great point. I just saw my little timer just went off. So does that mean we're at the end of the program?
Yeah, we are. That's we're right at the half-hour mark. So I want to thank you again, Jonathan. This was an amazing presentation, an amazing chat. Megan, thank you so much as well for your participation, and everybody that participated. Really appreciate it. And I would implore you all to reach out to both of them if you do have any questions or just simply want to network. I think they're both just very valuable in general in what they shared today. So thank you all so much. And please feel free to reach out to me as well if you guys have any questions or if there's anything that I can do for either one of you in regards to today's presentation, if you guys need anything, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, all.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks
guys.
for hosting.
Yeah, you
Cheers.
guys have a great night.
Cheers.
You too. Bye.